Thank you, Brian. I'd also like to thank CRW for offering this time this evening to talk a little bit about the history of the organization. And also thank Melanie Morris, who's videotaping the event today. She's also a member of CRW and runs a TV show on Summerville cable TV on bicycling. So it's quite a wonderful coincidence, and also John Allen, who's videotaping as well. What I'm going to do this evening is talk a little bit about introduce Bruce, really, and then ask him a few questions, and then I'm going to throw it over to the audience so anybody who wants to hear about the real dirt on CRW. He tells me there's lots of stories that he doesn't know if he dares tell them, but maybe I'll get him to tell a few of them. Anyway, a little bit about my own background, how I got into and how I got to know Bruce. I wrote a book called The Boston Cycling Craze. It was all about Boston cycling in the 19th century. And while I was doing that, I discovered that there was a very famous ride called the Wheel Around the Hub. It took place in 1879. It was all on high wheelers. It was a 2-day ride that went from Roxbury to Sharon to Cohasset and back again to Boston. And I thought, what a wonderful thing. And of course it was, because they published it in some of the finest journals at the time. And that really kicked off bicycling in the U.S. and made Boston kind of a leading place. Well, so I'm doing this work, and I'm ready to get into my next book, bring things more up to date. And I'm Googling around, and I find out that indeed there had been a reenactment of that bicycle ride. It took place in 1965, and it was organized by a man named George Bailey. George Bailey, who's that? Well, then a little more Googling around, and I found out, yes, that George Bailey ran the ride. His wife Lucy did the sag wagon, along with a 3-year-old son, and another one of his sons, Duff Bailey, and a daughter, Janet, had actually done that ride as well as teenagers. And so, interesting story. And then I Googled a little more, and I thought, oh my God, it turns out that George Bailey was one of the founders of the Charles River Wheelman. I thought, wow, that's amazing. And in 1966, indeed he was, along with his brother Bruce, who's here with us tonight. And Bruce's story is really an amazing story. He's an engineer, a father several times over, also a long-distance cyclist, double centuries to his name, a hill climber up Mount Washington, also a kind of a daredevil commuter on bicycle from Milton, and another claim to fame is that he, in 1971, he was involved in Bike to Work Day, and actually raced against Larry DeCara, who some of you may know was a Boston City Councilor. Larry DeCara rode his car into work, and Bruce beat him on the bike. Come straight up Dorchester Avenue, if you can believe it. So, anyway, in 1966, they all formed the Charles River Wheelman. I'm going to ask you some questions about that, but just a couple of other notes. In 67, Ralph Galen, another founder, and he and John Vanderpool and one other rider from CRW all went up or raced up Mount Washington. I guess you'd call it a race. Not a race? No. Okay. All up Mount Washington. In 1969, they all went to Nova Scotia as part of a combined CRW-LAW ride up to Nova Scotia. And he brought his 3 sons along, Conrad, Brownell, and Bruce Jr. That's right, they all went along on that ride. So he's got quite a bicycling history, and I guess I'd like to start off by asking you, Bruce, kind of how CRW got started. Like, how is it you all formed together during during that time. We didn't have any internet then. How'd you all get together during that time? And what kind of, I don't know, information hubs were there? How did you meet each other? And then how did you get the CRW started?
It's very simple that Ben Olden, who ran the Bicycle Exchange, was the hub of our meetings. And somehow Ralph Galen and Ben, and I was just buying, I had just bought bicycles for my 3 kids and discovered that bicycles had gears. And not like my Elgin bicycle newspaper days in high school. And I said when I saw the gears stretch, the cable stretch, and I was advised that the owner was advised that he was going to have to make adjustments. And I said, well, I better get acquainted with this. And so I went for a ride and I said, I've got to have one of these things. And so I got one of those things, secondhand in Raleigh Sports, for $50 from the lady in Quincy. And started to get up early in the morning so I could go for a ride out around Blue Hill. And, it occurred to me as I was laboring around Blue Hill one morning, there's no need to do this, I could ride to work. Started taking the T, which was easy from where I lived in Milton. And so that's how I started to commute. And the commercial part of my bicycling life certainly had most of the hilarious events and not so hilarious. But the Charles River Wheelman started in Ben Elkin's shop somehow, coalesced around Ralph Galen, and I was lucky enough to hear about it, and Brother George was, and 4 other guys. And so it was in an awful rainy September Sunday afternoon, 50 years ago. We met in the eaves of the old Ashland Railroad Station, and that was where the CRW started. And I see it's still the Charles River Wheelman. They haven't succumbed to the natural pressures that the Native American bicyclists did. We used to be Native American Wheelmen, for those of you who don't know. But that changed. And I don't know what, has there ever been pressure for Charles River people? I've never heard of any movement.
That's the name of their newsletter now, it's the Wheel People.
I'm on touch. So, and there were lots of people that I discovered at MIT where I was working, and everywhere I went, there were bicycles parked, and not securely. So that became a natural project for me and David Gordon Wilson to work on for getting civilized parking arrangements at MIT. So the Wheelman, it started when we had before we were organized, we had several century rides. We started Ralph Gaines' dental office in Mount Auburn, bottom of Mount Auburn Street, just outside of Harvard Square. And we would head off west and off 117, Route 20, and so forth, out to Leominster and through the Leominster State Forest and managing 100 miles or so. And by the time we had the first ride was a century ride. Around with it, Ralph Galen's. And then we weren't very serious about our conditioning. And with that century ride at Ralph's with a cocktail party. Sounds would be unheard of these days, would it not? Well, anyway, so that was the start of it, and I my own cycling, I did some long distance bicycling, but most of it was back from several centuries with a cycling map from Springfield. They were headed by the Rademacher and his family largely. And I went on that ride that Larry mentioned, the Nova Scotia tour in '69. That's where the cycle mats came in touch with Charles Hill Newman. And we had a lot of good rides with them. I did particularly. I enjoyed their company. We did the through double centuries. That's enough for now. I'm not going to go into the sorry details of my final ride home.
I'll ask you about those in just a minute. One of the things to point out is that George, your brother, was the club historian, but you were the rides leader for the CRW. And I wanted to ask you, how do you arrange that? Did you herald the rides? Did you have a suite? What did you do with stragglers? Take them out and shoot them? Or what's the deal? So tell us a little bit about those early days of leading rides for the CRW.
Well, of course, in the 60s, we never heard of Xerox. And so communications were considerably more difficult than they are now. And as I took my assignment as a tour designer, and I took it very seriously, and it was a great pains to use everything that was available to me in my workplace. I remember those rather crude maps of our routes. We didn't have arrows. The arrows had been invented, but they weren't very popular around here. And so I was always intrigued by maps, and bicycling made it much more interesting. And so I just moved and we tried. That's why I would just move in. I thought it would be fun, 50-mile rides or so around Boston, Saturday hours. That was the beginning.
Thanks. One other question, just to speak of maps, your nephew Doug later on became one of the organizers of the first Boston Bike Map, 1976. And George's wife, Lucy, was also one of the incorporators of the Boston Area Bicycle Coalition. So your whole family's had a really strong impact on bicycling in this area. But I want to go back to one thing which has to do with the founding of the organization. I went through all the founders. And first of all, there were like 8 or 9 people altogether, depending on how you count. Of that, as I counted it, there were 3 or 4 engineers, 1 orthodontist, 1 dentist turned psychiatrist. Well, that's what I mean. Well, Ralph was originally a dentist, then became an orthodontist. And then there was another dentist who became a psychiatrist later on. And then another chap who was a lawyer, a newspaper man, and one woman in the group who was an instructor out of the Worcester State. And I want to ask you, why were there so few women involved in the organization? Except, of course, we got to say that Ralph's wife, Ruth, operated a sag wagon along with Fred Chapin's wife, Sue. And as I remember, they both got divorced. Fred got divorced too, yes. So anyway, just reflect a little bit on gender relations during that time. I told you I'd put you on the spot. But tell us a little bit about that. But also, this is a pretty interesting slice of Boston's sort of folks. We have so many engineers, lawyers, doctors, dentists involved with the founding of the club. It almost seems like it hasn't changed a bit. Or has it?
Eddie was not a professional. He was from New Bedford, and I can't remember his name. But he liked to wear lederhosen. And he was somewhat of an embarrassment to the more serious writers among us. But he was not actually among the style, but he was one of the early writers. So they weren't all engineers, lawyers, and heads, other medical type. And there certainly were no women. And there's nothing, I have no explanation for that.
Or maybe in the next 50th year anniversary, we'll talk about that. Questions from the audience? Who would like to ask a question? Yes, way in the back.
How did the club begin to grow? How did it expand?
The question is, how did the club begin to grow? How did it expand during your first years with it?
It really had everything to do with Ben Olkin's bicycle exchange, because any riders who came into Ben's place, he'd put them in touch with us and send them to Ralph Gambon or Rivers. That was how CRW got started, really.
Other questions?
When did women first join?
The question is, when did women first join? If you know.
Still aren't allowed, right?
I can't remember when the women none of the centuries or double centuries. We had a few real tigers. I can remember one of the early riders. This is after CRW was pretty well established, but it was on one of our century rides, and we were going through Leominster, right, the main street of Leominster, and he really was working, managed to break his bicycle seat in full steam, and spectacularly survived it. He rode the rest of 50 miles or so without a seat. The only incident of that that I remember, the double century, one of the riders, a Springfield person, we were on the second half of it, riding up from Shawmont on Route 2, the Mohawk Trail. We were headed through that part of the Route 2 into New Hampshire. And at the top of the hill was the road had been blocked off for construction. One of the riders, there were only about a dozen riders, and fellow had a flat tire, and he spent a little time fixing it, and by the time he was trying to make up for that. And at the top of that hill, he was headed down and charging ahead as fast as he could when he hit that building that had been put up to block off the road. And so he was mad at me, the sag was picked him up, and he was trying to straighten his bike out to continue. But that, she required that he get in the car and ride home with her. But there were some very serious riders. I can only remember the determination of that particular rider when he hit that block. And there he was found straightening front fork out.
Actually, it turns out, if you look back, we have now in the archives, because when Ralph Gambon died, he left a bag shed full of material, which are all on the archives now. And in amongst that treasure trove is a membership list from the CRW from 1970. And it turns out that even by 1970, a third of the riders, members were women. And if you look at the membership today, a third of the riders are women. The difference is that in 1970, close to a third of the membership, in fact, a little more than a third of the membership was from either Boston or Cambridge. And that's down to about 12% now. As CRW has moved out into the suburban areas now more and more. So it's been a big change. So let me see if there's one or two more questions, and then we're going to turn it over to Ken to do some awards. More questions? Yes?
How many rides a year did you do? Did you ride every week?
How many rides a year did you do? Did you ride every week or what?
Well, we pretty much put things aside in the wintertime. We really might say a pickup ride from anywhere 1 to 12 degrees. That's true. And those were not centuries rides. But otherwise, starting this springtime, we probably had at least 2 centuries a month.
Wow. Wow. I'm impressed.
So can you tell us a little bit about that ride up Mount Washington? That you were involved with a couple of other famous members of the CRW.
So Ralph, the indomitable Ralph Galen, was really the one who wanted to do it, and I thought it sounded like a nice idea. So I was designated to lead this first annual Charles River Wheel ride up Mount Washington. And so Ralph and I and another rider who, another member of the original group, camped out at the base anywhere around the base of the mountain. It was a beautiful day when we started our ride, but they were waiting for us with a formidable presence.
Was it John Vanderbilt?
John Vanderbilt, who somehow got word that this ride was going to take place. He was still with the Air Force in McLean, Virginia, but he'd driven up for the occasion. And he was properly attired and had about the best thing in the way of a bicycle that was available at the time. I made the mistake of borrowing one of my kids' Euro 8 Speed Peugeot, because they had lower gear than my Lego Special. That was a mistake. I weighed about 150 pounds at the time, so a few pounds on the bicycle would have been an advantage for me, better than the gearing. But Vanderpool was new to us, and we all took off, and he had the advantage, he took advantage of the fact that when he got to his higher gear, couldn't quite manage the climb. He just put the bicycle on his shoulder and ran. And I can remember Ralph was on hand to take my picture at the 400 meters to the, or 400 yards it was to the summit. And I was last. But that was the first Charles River. And it's been a beautiful day to start out. I've been looking forward to this so much. And then, of course, when we got to the top, it was cloudy. We couldn't see Mount Madison. We couldn't see anything. And then we put on the sweaters that I'd been advised to carry. Got to use. That was the first ride up. And of course, you can't go fast on the way down because you can't go any faster than the cars. So that's Mount Washington.
Thank you, Bruce.